So now we are really in the home stretch now. I'm going to bring up Manik Suri, who's the founder and CEO of Therma, which is a tech startup working to change the cold chain to help the planet and human health. Before that, he was the co-founder of the governance lab at NYU in Brooklyn, which is a very cool thing. So Manik.
David, thanks so much. Great to be here. That's where we met, actually, a decade ago. How many of you, I'll start with a controversial topic, how many of you are familiar with the COVID-19 vaccine? Just to piggyback, and I know I'm getting close to cocktails and dinner, so I'll try and be brief today. Most people have never heard of the cold chain until recently. And we're going to be talking about what exactly the cooling crisis is. The cold chain moves some of our most valuable product across production down to consumption. We're talking about two sets of goods, food and pharmaceuticals. It's life-affirming, life-giving stuff, and all of us take it for granted. The cold chain is obviously important. Food has been blowing up in the cold chain in the last few years. Online delivery, e-commerce, the fact that everyone's ordering from home, cold storage in the food supply chain is growing at 20% CAGR. Pharma, of course, as many of you followed the news the last couple of years, COVID-19 vaccines and many other perishables, drugs, plasma vaccines, super tense sensitive. And so these cold chains are booming. There's a huge amount of growth. However, there's a lot of problems and a lot of inefficiency in the current cold chain. So these aren't exactly perfect. Very few people today have access to reliable cold chain. As a result, 25% of vaccines get lost in transit. Millions of people don't have access to vaccines on a regular basis. And in the COVID-19 vaccine, around 3 billion people are estimated not to be able to get access to a vaccine because they don't have access to cold chain. So we're not anywhere close to where we need to be with the cold chain as it's growing. And of course, there's a huge amount, for those of you familiar with food waste, of spoilage and loss across the cold supply chain. We're talking about billions of dollars worth of inventory that's wasted and lost every year. As a result, the cold chain is booming. And even as it's booming, it's causing warming. And that's why cooling down and heating up. The cold chain in total is responsible for what we think is almost 10% of all emissions when you combine the product wasted, the energy consumed, and the refrigerants, the ultra-warming chemicals that go into the cooling effect. And so we're talking about 8 to 9% of all emissions touching on the cold chain. And this is an industry that's growing massively. It's not just the environment that pays. There's billions of dollars worth of product spoilage, inventory loss, and of course, hundreds of millions of people that don't have access today to food and pharmaceuticals that could benefit from better supply chain. And that's why the cold chain's at a crossroads. We need it for human health, but the planet's health is suffering. At Therma, we're trying to build the world's first smart cold chain. And that means combining technologies. We're building IoT-enabled monitoring as a base layer. We've gone from 100 to 10,000 sensors, trying to go from 10,000 to 100,000 on our next growth arc in the last couple of years. This is the monitoring layer that enables you to start moving product and monitoring it in real time, catching downtime, catching asset failures. But ultimately, as they say, you can't manage what you can't measure. Once you can measure these assets, we can start optimizing them. And so now we're starting to move into asset optimization, turning things up and down dynamically, knowing how long refrigeration and cooling equipment should run, needs to run, making sure we can catch refrigerant leaks early and often. This is a classic IoT to data play. And ultimately, what we're trying to do is create a distributed network of millions of batteries. This is really the future for Therma and for what we think of as many assets. Refrigeration for the last 100 years has been run dumb. You buy it, you plug it in the wall, you run it, and basically you don't touch it until it breaks or it fails. Then you repair it or you replace it. We see refrigeration as untapped batteries. Millions and millions of these. There's 90 million stationary refrigerators in the business world, 1.4 billion in the residential. We leave them fully charged, but the product can stay cold for a certain amount of time. In the last 6 months, we've started turning refrigeration off dynamically, participating in grid flexibility and grid resilience. So you think of these assets as big energy consumers, and the fact they go down a lot in waste product, we're starting to turn these into assets that can create energy demand and energy supply for the grid, save money, reduce downtime, and prevent emissions in the process. That's what we think about as the future of smart cold chain. And so ultimately, at Therma and climate startups around the world, what we're trying to do is both advance human health while also protecting the planet's health. There's a huge opportunity both in the cold chain, and if you care about cooling up and heating, cooling down and heating up, check us out. We'd love to get to know you. It's great to be here, and I hope you guys enjoyed the evening. Thanks.
Very efficient download. Thank you so much.
Thanks,
really
David.
good to have you here.